Hello, my name's Nick Hillman and I'm Director of the Higher Education Policy Institute, and I'm here to tell you what university and higher education is really like, in the hope that Year 12 and Year 13 pupils and those who advise them can make as well-informed decisions as possible. Uh, why am I an appropriate person to do this? I've studied at three universities: Manchester, Cambridge, and what was then called Queen Mary and Westfield College, but is now called Queen Mary, University of London. I'm a former secondary school teacher, and I used to run a pre-university course as part of that. I was also an advisor to the university's minister when the tuition fee system that we have in England was introduced. And I've worked at the think tank where I work for 10 years. And I'm also a governor, so oversee the work of the University of Manchester, a very large university, and also my local university, the University of Buckingham, which is close to where I live. Why go to university at all? Well, university is absolutely not right for everybody, and other people do go to university but don't go immediately after school or college. But those who do go tend to have really positive outcomes. These are all the things I'm about to put up on the slide are well evidenced by proper academic research. Of course, they won't be true in every example. Some people go to university and it doesn't work out for them. They'd have been better off doing something else. However, on average, people who do go have all sorts of benefits. They're more likely in the rest of their lives to be engaged citizens. They're more likely to vote. They're more likely to be part of public debates. They're likely to be healthier. They're less likely to drink or smoke heavily. They're more likely to trust and tolerate others, which again can make it easier to be a full participant in our society. They're less likely to be unemployed, including when there's a recession or there's challenges in the labour market and there aren't enough jobs to go around. And this has been proven through many different periods of history. They're less likely to commit crime. They earn more. I've put here especially for women, and this isn't because women graduates earn more than men graduates, because we have in our society a gender pay gap, sadly. But it's because traditionally women who haven't gone to university have often, on average again, not always, but on average, ended up more often than men working in professions where the pay is not that great, like the retail sector, for example. There are men who work in the retail sector, of course, but on balance, female non-graduates, women who haven't been to university, are more likely to end up in lower paid professions. So female graduates, the gap between being a female graduate and being a female non-graduate is typically bigger than the gap between a male graduate and a male non-graduate. And you're more likely to live longer if you've been to university. Again, your health is better. Again, these are averages. It won't be true for everybody. People going to university in 2023, 2024, immediately from school or college, are part of a good-sized cohort, a good-sized group, but it's smaller than the number of 18-year-olds 15 years ago, and it's smaller than the number of 18-year-olds will be in coming years. So in some ways, that means they're quite well placed because they're part of a slightly smaller group of people. However, obviously, they have had their education severely disrupted by COVID, so they've been unlucky in other ways. And even if you are part of a smaller age group than in the past or the future, there can still be difficulties making that transition from school or college to university. And an example of that is some universities have expanded very rapidly recently, and that's led to some student accommodation shortages. So the most important message I want to leave you with today is do your homework. And one way in which you need to do your homework is around demand for the course and the university and the accommodation that you are interested in. We are perhaps most well known for a big survey that we do every year with another organisation called Advance HE. And we ask 10,000 students every year a whole range of questions. And one of the questions we ask them is, are you happy with the choice that you've made? If you were filling in your UCAS form again, would you make the same choice about course and university? And 59% say they would. So it's a majority, which is great. But 10% say, well, I'd choose the same course, but I'd do it at a different university. Another 8% say, well, no, I'd do a different course, same university, but different course. 5% say I'd choose a different course and a different university. So there are different views. And again, this highlights the importance of doing your research before you arrive, because as it says there, almost no one regrets the decision to go to higher education, but not everyone makes the optimum decision for them. And more evidence of this is another question we ask is to students is, has your experience been what you expected it to be like before you got there? And only 11% of students say it's been exactly like I thought it would be. A majority of students, just a majority, 51% say it's been better in some ways and worse in others. So, in general, they're glad they were there, but it's not been exactly as they expected. 17% say it's been better overall than I expected, and another 17% say it's been worse overall than I expected. But there's very few, as I say, who say it's been exactly as they expected. So it's worth doing your homework before you get there. And one area where people very often, there's a mismatch between what they expect and what it's actually like is around costs. And we asked in a different survey, students, we said, actually, we asked applicants, so people who've filled in a UCAS form but haven't yet arrived at university, what do you think will be your biggest cost when you get there? And we got a whole range of options: course materials, groceries, nights out, student trips, student membership of student societies. The most popular answer was rent, but it's still under half of applicants said rent. And this shocked me because for nearly all students, the biggest cost will be rent, and evidence for that comes from the National Student Money Survey. And they say students spend on average £924 a month, and 418 of that goes on rent. It will be often higher than that. This is an average. So if you're in London, if you're in particularly nice accommodation, etc., it will be higher. So it's worth bearing in mind your living costs. One of the reasons people get it wrong about what university is really like is they forget just what a big break it is. So you'll be learning in new ways. Your higher education is often about independent directed learning, where you're given a book list, you're given some guidance, but also you're left to get on with it for a lot of the time, to a greater degree than you might have been at school. You're very often living away from home for the first time. Some people go to their local university and continue to live at home, but majority do not. You're likely to be financially independent for the first time. You're away from your friends and family. You may have been at school with the same people from primary school to secondary school to sixth form. And when you go to university, you may be miles away from them. The age at which people typically go to university is very often the age when mental health conditions first show themselves. So some physical health conditions are much more common at older ages, but mental health conditions first typically show themselves between the mid-teenage years and the mid-20s. So exactly the time when people are going off to university. You might be separate, you might have some health support needs, and suddenly you've got a new doctor because you registered with a new GP in a new town or city. So these are all sort of breakpoints, and these are typically much bigger in our country than in many other countries, because in many other countries you often do continue living at home and attending your local university when you go to higher education. But the British model is much more often to go away from home. Another way that people misunderstand what higher education's like is they sometimes misjudge the workload. And the workload, particularly in some subjects, can be very high at university. If you're training to be a teacher, for example, on the top line here, or you're training to be a doctor, or you're training to be a vet, or you want to be a dentist, then the hours can be very high. And these colors here are contact hours, so how much time are actually in a lecture or a seminar. Is the red. The pale blue is independent study. How much time are you spending in the library, in your room, studying on your own, or maybe with a friend or two? And then the sort of orangey, yellowy, orangey color is work that's linked to your course but outside the university. So it might be a placement in a hospital, placement in a museum if you're doing museum studies, a work experience linked to your course. And you'll see here that some subjects have a much lighter workload than others. You might think, by the way, that students doing the least work would be the happiest because they have more free time, and that's actually not the case. Our evidence shows that students on about 30 hours work a week are the happiest. So they're not on the really high hours, but they're also not occupying only a small number of hours with work. So it's not the case that students with the lightest workloads are the happiest. Students often feel lonely sometimes when they first get to university. As I say, it's a big break point in your life. Only 4% of students say they never feel lonely. I don't show you this chart to scare you or to worry you. I show it to you to remind you that these feelings are normal when you get to university. 36% of students say they feel lonely at least once a week. And it can also be a spur to encouraging you to go and join a club or a society, get involved in the students' union, to meet other people in your hall of residence. So I don't show you this to scare you. I show you this to remind you that there are strategies that one can follow when one gets to university to help build those networks of friends. And there are other things you can do to prepare before you go away to university. So one is think as much about your accommodation as your course. You'll spend more time in your accommodation than you do in lectures. So, and I don't mean by this, find the nicest accommodation you can afford and go for it. I mean, look for accommodation with really good social spaces where it'll be easy to meet other people. Look for accommodation which will leave you enough money left over after you've paid your rent that you can have a social life as well. Look for accommodation, as I say, where it's easy to have a social life. Before you arrive, this is my ABC, before you arrive, do your research and tell your university of any needs. So universities do have big support services in place. For example, if you suffer from a mental health condition, tell the university before you get there. Don't turn up and expect them to find you and to immediately know what support you need. Tell them, and they will try, resources dependent and within their expertise, to support you. They have counseling services, they have support groups, other things that can help. But if you don't tell them in advance, it's much harder for you to access those support needs unless you really reach out. Look for clubs and societies that match your interest. If you're desperate to be a journalist, try and find a university that's got a good student newspaper that you can write for. If you're dead keen on rugby, make sure there's a rugby team or more than one rugby team. If you're really keen on debating and public speaking, is there a debating society that has competitions against other universities? You can find out all these things before you get there, and it's well worth doing. Many people get worried about the high tuition fees at university. My advice to you would be don't worry about them at all. That may sound an odd thing to say when £9,250 annual fees are very high. I appreciate that. But I say it for two reasons. The first is you only pay that money back after you're in well-paid work after university. And a lot of people don't pay the whole amount back. The government writes some of it off. So the repayment conditions are very different to other types of loans. Your credit card debt is much tougher than this sort of debt. And the second reason I say it is that the reason the fee is high is so that the university can spend a lot of money on your education. It costs a lot of money to deliver good lectures, to have good libraries, to have good IT facilities, to have nice buildings, to have good career support and welfare support and an active students' union. And those are the things that the money is going on. Students tend, after they've enrolled at university, to actually be more worried about their living costs. So let's spend a minute or two looking at those. The government says that a student who's living away from their parents, living away from their a normal regular home, and studying outside London, London's more expensive. The government says in 2022-23 you need nearly £10,000 a year, £9,706 a year to live on. Bit more in 2023-2024, 9,978, very roughly £10,000. And if you come from a household that doesn't have a high income, then you can borrow all that money. So if your household income is less than £25,000 a year, you can borrow the whole nearly £10,000 from the government. But if your household income is less than £25,000, sorry, more than £25,000 a year, if it's higher than £25,000 a year, the government expects your parents or guardians or the household in which you live in to contribute. And if you're, let's say your parents are on really healthy salary, joint salary of more than £60,000, they expect your parents to contribute over £5,000 a year to the costs of being a student. And your parents need to know this, and the government's not very good at telling your parents about it. So I urge you to encourage your parents to start thinking about how they're going to support you financially when you get to university. Again, I don't show you this slide to scare you. I show it to you so you can have that conversation with your parents. Some students, number of students, even if you get the maximum support, by the way, might not be quite enough to live on. And some students do paid jobs on the side, work in a bar, work in a restaurant, work in a museum, something like that. And that's not a bad idea, but and so long as you don't do too much of that sort of work, that it starts really affecting your academic studies. If you want to know more about this, have a look at the Martin Lewis Money Saving Expert website, because he's got further information about living costs and how much parents are expected to contribute. There's lots of information out there about different courses. And to give you an example of this, I'm not suggesting you choose your course by earnings, how much you're likely to earn afterwards. But if you really care about money more than anything else, the data's there. So for example, this chart shows you that people who've studied economics at university, the green dot here, the last green dot, earn more on average than people who've studied any other subject. Medicine's a little bit behind, excuse me, and maths is behind that. And then law comes a little bit further behind. So the dotted blue line here is how much people who have good GCSEs but don't go to university typically earn on average. And the green dots are how much more in general you'll earn if you study these subjects at university. There are a few subjects you'll see in the far left-hand side where you typically, on average, earn less than people who go to university. So if you do a creative arts degree, doesn't mean you shouldn't do creative arts. It might be your passion. Maybe you'll still make millions doing creative arts. But on average, people don't, but that's okay, because if they've got into it because it's their passion and that's what they really want to do, that's still a good reason to do it. I'm not showing you this because I'm suggesting you should pick your course so you earn lots of money. I'm showing it to you to show you that this sort of information is available. Other information is available. If you want to study at the university where the students are happiest, have a look at the data for that from the National Student Survey. This chart is for men. It's not completely dissimilar for women. This next chart is for women, and it shows you how much people earn according to which university they went to. So the LSE, the London School of Economics, typically leads to the highest earnings. Imperial in London, doing a lot of science and engineering courses. Oxford and Cambridge, they typically lead to high salaries, not for everybody, but on average. Other universities typically lead to somewhat lower salaries. Again, I'm not suggesting you choose your university by how much the graduates earn afterwards. I'm saying this sort of information is out there for people who are willing to do their homework when they're applying to university. So just to conclude with a few summary points, my recommendation would be, for most students, continuing to live at home is not the right option for them. It might be cheaper, although your parents might want to charge you rent. But for most students, moving away from home is a really exciting thing to do, to go to a different town or city, meet new friends, move into a different phase of their life. Secondly, London is different. London's full of fantastic universities and other higher education institutions, but it's an expensive place to live, and not everybody's comfortable living in a massive city. So if you're thinking about London, weigh up the pros and cons. Thirdly, student loans are not like other debts, so it's best not to worry too much about them, though they are loans, and eventually they will be. You will have to pay some of that money back when you've got a job after university. Remember, institutions and courses are very different from one another. Not every history course is the same. Not every university is the same. Do your research and your homework. Find student societies that match your interests. As I say, if you're dead keen on a particular sport, make sure that sport is on offer at the university you are most keen on. Think as much about your accommodation as your course. That's where you'll be spending a lot of your time. If you need to do some paid work on the side, that's fine. Some people who do a few hours a week paid work on the side, actually their academic studies improve because they have to be highly organized. But if people who do more than 10, 12, 15 hours a week paid work on the side, then their academic studies can suffer. So be careful about that. Make sure your parents know what the government is expecting of them in terms of contribution. And remember, being lonely sometimes is normal, but help is at hand, and universities want their students to succeed. So don't be afraid of asking for that help. Finally, follow your heart. Follow your heart. Don't only listen to advice from people like me, because choosing what you're going to do at university will set you on course for the rest of your lives. So make sure it's something that's going to lead to a profession that you want to do. And don't worry too much if things go wrong. Things do go wrong. People change course after they've enrolled. Sometimes people drop out, start again a year later, maybe at a different university, maybe on a different course. Sometimes people get to university and find there's all sorts of subjects available they'd never even heard of before that sound much more interesting than their own course. And they change. There are opportunities to change your mind. So don't be too fearful about that. I'm going to stop my presentation there. Thank you for listening. Here are 3 reports that you can find on our website, which gives you some evidence of the sorts of reports that we write that might be helpful. Report on access to higher education for Gypsy, Roma, traveller communities, what it's like to be a Black student living in student accommodation, a report on what it's like to be a first and family student if you come from a family where no one studied a higher education before. All that information and much more is available on our website, hepi.ac.uk. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.